I am very happy about today's class because we have back with us, she did an incredible job with us once before, we have KT McFarland back today, right here. Very happy about that. It's going to be a really interesting class session. But first of all, before we even get into KT, a huge thank you to the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women for making today's class possible. Huge applause for the center right there. The center has supported this class for over 10 years now, sending speakers to us, and they pay for them to come out, speakers that we wouldn't be able to enjoy otherwise. So I'm really, really appreciative. And for the first time ever, we have the president of the Clare Boothe Luce Center here with us today. In the back, that is Kimberly Begg right back there. Big applause for Kimberly. And on top of that, up front, what we have right here, we have Keith Work, who is a funder for the Clare Boothe Luce Center and made today's class possible. So big applause for Keith as well. So, this is one of the only classes where you get to hear a balanced point of view, or maybe it is the only class on campus that does that. It's really important to me, and the center makes that possible, which I'm forever grateful. Now about our speaker today. KT McFarland has served in several Republican administrations in top foreign policy positions over the past 50 years. Many different administrations she has experience with. She's the recipient of the Department of Defense's highest civilian honor, the Department Civilian Service Award. I said the highest honor, kids. Let's pay attention. Yeah, how about that? During the first Trump presidency, KT was President Trump's first deputy national security advisor. She's a regular commentator on Fox News, and her most recent book is Revolution Trump, Washington, and We the People. She's a graduate of George Washington University, where she majored in Chinese studies. She received her master's in politics, philosophy, and economics from Oxford. That's in England, for those of you playing along. And she did further graduate work at MIT, where she studied nuclear weapons, China, and the Soviet Union. How about that? And lastly, in 2015, she was the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women Woman of the Year. Please welcome KT McFarland.
Well, with an introduction like that, I'm going to turn on the sound. Okay, can everybody hear me? Yes. Even if you don't want to, you're stuck. I want to explain, after that extremely kind invitation and all the people who have made this possible, and when I came, I guess it was right before the election, and talked about Trump foreign policy, you know, you guys gave me a hard time. I mean, it was a good time. Very thoughtful questions, tough questions, but honest questions. I think we had a very good conversation, so I'm delighted to see that you've asked me back, and now we can have an even fuller conversation because there's an awful lot that's happening, in fact, even is happening today, this hour. I should explain to you how Washington works and what a deputy national security advisor does. So if you think there's a president and then there's a secretary of state, in this case Marco Rubio, he's at the State Department, he goes all around the world negotiating deals, meeting with all of our allies, meeting with the president as well, but mostly his an outward-facing job to the world. The second sort of major national security figure is called the National Security Advisor, and that person has an office right down the hall from the Oval Office. So it's actually the National Security Advisor's office is closer than that exit sign is. They're within, 40 steps of each other. And the National Security Advisor is the person who's at the president's elbow all day long. Gives him the president's daily brief in the morning, talks to him about overnight developments. If there's a crisis, the National Security Advisor runs down the hall, talks to the president, and runs what's called the White House Situation Room. There's a deputy national security advisor, which is what I was in the Trump administration. And that's the person who's supposed to take a step back from the day-to-day and take whatever the new president or the president's ideas are, often bumper stickers, from a campaign, and turn those ideas, put meat on the bones. So take those ideas and put them into context of, okay, what does peace through strength mean? What does MAGA mean? And so that was my job. And that's the person who meets with all the agencies, obviously on a regular basis with the president, and whose office is also, 30 steps from the Oval Office. So that's what I did at the beginning of the Trump's first term, and laid down the policies which then have governed not just the first term, but are definitely bearing fruit, and the same policies in the second term. There are some differences, but mostly differences of intensity as opposed to not necessarily different policies. So I thought I would talk about things that you may have heard buzzwords, but have no idea what they really mean. Has anybody heard of America First? Okay, does anybody know exactly what that means? Oh, good, so that's why I'm here. Before I get into that though, I think I want to know something about you. How many of you are registered to vote? How many of you voted in the last election? I won't ask you for whom, I have an idea. How many of you are Californians? And how many of you are from out of state? How many are students? How many are just interested people from the community? Okay. How many of you are humanities majors? Politics, philosophy, English, all that stuff. And how many of you are STEM science majors? And how many of you are taking this as a required course? That is awesome. So thank you very much. I'm flattered that you're here. So now let me explain to you the thinking behind President Trump's America First policy. It stems from the idea and the concept that after World War II, our leaders, mostly American leaders, and they were Democrats from the Roosevelt and Truman administration, sat down and said, okay, so we now won World War I, we won World War II, we are now really the only man standing. All of our adversaries and allies are pretty compromised societies, their economies were bombed, there's nothing left of them. So we, the United States, are going to set the post-World War order. But how are we going to do it? Because we've just seen the US got dragged into World War I. We won World War I because of the American entry into the war halfway through. And then World War II, the United States more or less single-handedly won World War II because of our economy, our politics, our weapons, et cetera, et cetera. How do we prevent World War III? Because by the late 1940s, after World War II was finished, there was a communist movement, there was a communist Soviet Union, now a communist China in 1950. The communist wave was thought to be moving around the world, coming into Europe. So the leaders of the day said, okay, how are we going to prevent World War III, which now could be with nuclear weapons, since the United States and the Soviet Union had nukes, and how are we going to, A, prevent a war and prevent a nuclear war? So they came up with a really novel idea. And they said, okay, the United States, we're rich, we're prosperous, we didn't have the ravages of war in our own society. We are going to pay for and underwrite the security and the economy of our former adversaries, our enemies, and for our allies, because everybody's a wreck. So we did. So what we said, we devised a series of economic plans, what's called the Marshall Plan, and we literally gave money to the Europeans and to Japan, not in the Marshall Plan, but we gave money to our former adversaries and our allies to say, use that money to rebuild your societies. And then we said to them, and we want you to build your economy, we want you to make stuff and sell stuff. So we are going to give you very favorable economic terms of trade. We're not going to charge you much at all on tariffs, which is a tax, to have your goods enter the American market, but you can charge us 5 times that amount for our things going into your market. So for example, German cars could come into the United States with a 5% tariff. American cars, Ford Motor Company, Chevys, et cetera, would have a 25% tariff in Germany. We knew that was to our economic disadvantage, but we were willing to do that. Part of it was generosity, but mostly it was practical. Because if these countries didn't build their economies, didn't rebuild their societies, we would walk into World War III. The other thing we did is say, okay, militaries are expensive. We will also underwrite your security. We will pay for your security. We will create NATO. We had Asian alliances. And we said, we'll 75, 80% of it will bear the burden. We'll build the weapons. We'll have the military. You don't have to focus on that as much. Use that money to build your societies. So that was the plan in 1950, and it worked brilliantly. We didn't have World War III. We created competitors economically, but that became then the template of how the United States would conduct its foreign policy in the post-war period. We did the same thing with Japan, Korea. We tried to do the same thing with China, but they had a different plan, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the subsidies were never meant to be permanent. They were always meant to last as long as those countries needed to get on their feet. And then they would start assuming more responsibility for their own defense, and we would equalize or reciprocate the tariffs. We would make a more level playing field with our trading partners. But our European, especially, friends, when we say to them, well, we want you to, you're not even contributing 1% of your GNP to defense. We'd like you to contribute 1.5%, 2%. And they always say, well, it's not a good time for us right now. We really don't want to do that. And the way I've described it, actually to my children, my grandchildren, is think about it this way. Mom and dad pay for college. You graduate. You get a job. And you get your first apartment. And mom and dad may help with a car. They may help help you, with the rent, but they do not expect to be paying for you when you're 30 years old. They expect you to go off and thrive on your own. So the attitude of the United States was, we did this, we did it temporarily, we didn't want to do it permanently, and the attitude of our allies was, we love the subsidies. We don't think we should have to change this much at all. So when Trump comes into office for the first time, he said, wait a minute, this is not fair. And so we are gonna do two things. We're gonna go to our allies and say, pay more. You can afford it, your economies are thriving. And we also said to them, we're gonna have a reciprocal trade balance. So we want equal access to your markets. If you're gonna have a 2% tariff, we're gonna have a 2% tariff. And our allies didn't like it. They fought like mad during the first term to say they didn't have the money for the defense and they didn't want to change the trading system, but in the end, they have done it. In the first term, they agreed to increase defense expenditures, and now we've just had probably the most significant of the tariff wars, the trade wars, are now coming to an end, with the exception of China, and I'll get to that in a minute. So the whole America First plan was to say, we're going to stop subsidizing the world, and we're going to put American foreign policy interests first. Not Germany's, not Japan's, not other countries, ours. And then the next part of the plan was to peace through strength. Now, this was the same policy that Reagan had in the 1980s, and the idea was that we would keep the peace by being strong. Now, it didn't necessarily or only mean military strength. We wouldn't, peace is an ambiguous, it's a great bumper sticker. But think about, what does peace mean? Is it peace for capitulation, peace through conquest? What is strength? Economic, military, technological? It was meant to be all of those things. So it's not just peace through military strength, it's peace through all of those levels of strength. And the United States has historically, in the last 60 years, been the leader of all of those. The next policy, though, so it's America First, peace through strength, and then MAGA, Make America Great Again. Now, what does that mean? It means to take the advantages of the United States, economic, technological, military, political, moral, whatever you want, and to restore America's position of primacy in the world, which had been eroding. So, how are you going to do that? So how do you make America great again? It would be based on two things that were present in Trump's first term, and even more so, the situation has evolved to the point where we have even more advantages in the second term. The first term was based on our energy capabilities. So in the last 15 years, the United States realized, or American engineers, scientists, energy people realized that we could get oil and gas out of rocks, shale oil, shale gas, and that we could do it. We always knew we could do it, but it was never going to be effective. It wasn't safe, it wasn't cheap, just wasn't realistic. But about 15 years ago, American scientists, engineers, project managers realized that we could do three things that we couldn't do before. One was horizontal drilling. Now, normal gushers for oil wells, you dig down, you drill down, and then the oil comes out. Horizontal drilling is you drill down and then drill sideways, so you have access to all of the oil or gas that's in a much broader period. Then the second thing is 3D mapping, which was made possible really by technology, computers, that we could take areas of the United States and say, okay, this makes sense. There's probably going to be oil here. There's going to be gas here. And then the third thing was hydraulic fracturing. And that was to take oil and get it out of rocks. Again, it was expensive at first, but as technology improved, especially over the last 15 years, we found that we could get oil and natural gas and get it to market, refine it, get it to market, cheaper, faster, better, safer, cleaner than any other country in the world. So Make America Great Again was going to be predicated on this energy capability that the United States had that really nobody else has. And what it did was it had a number of knock-on effects, which we're now seeing. One of them is manufacturing. So for the last 15 years, America's lost manufacturing, especially in the heartland of the country, to overseas manufacturing. What it meant, though, was that our peer competitors in making things, Europe, Japan, Korea, probably China, those countries all have to import energy. Energy is expensive for them. But we are now in a position where it's almost not free, but it's very inexpensive for us competitively. So if it takes a unit, let's say it costs $100 to make a car in America, and that's all the sort of fixed costs. Our energy, maybe we're spending another $10 on energy. The Europeans, Japan, et cetera, they may make a car for $100 too, but they're going to have to spend 3 times that for the energy component. So all of a sudden, American products, which are usually better manufactured and for all the reasons, made in America is an advantage, all of a sudden they were a competitive economic advantage. So with the cars that we're going to be able to sell today, the manufacturing we're doing now, and this is just starting now. We haven't started seeing the results of it yet, but they're starting, but you're going to really see them in about 9 or 10 months. All of a sudden, our manufacturing we had the ability to make stuff again, and is competitive in the world environment. And because we've gone to these allies and adversaries and said, we want equal access to your markets. We want to be able to sell our cars in your country. We want to be able to sell to Canada. We want to be able to sell butter to Canada. All of a sudden, we're on a level playing field for the tariffs. So it means that there's a great resurgence, starting now, going gangbusters soon, in American manufacturing. The other thing, a knock-on effect of this, so it's good for our economy, not so much for the other guys, but the other thing is that it's very detrimental to the bad guys. So Iran, Russia, which I would put in the bad guy category, they need oil at about $100 a barrel because it pays for their whole society. I mean, nobody buys Iranian cars, right? Nobody buys Russian cars. They only buy Russian weapons or oil and natural gas, and they only buy Iranian oil. Our companies can make a profit if oil is $50 a barrel. So what that means is we are not just the ability to be energy independent, but energy dominant. The United States is in the position now, and it has started in the last several years, but we will be able to power the world for hundreds of years, cheaper, safer, better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, than any other country can. The other thing is that those are based on our energy needs now. If you look ahead 12 months, the energy needs are going to expand exponentially. Why? Because of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. It takes a lot of energy. So we're in an amazing position going forward because, again, our energy is cheap, safe, abundant, nearby. We will have an extraordinary competitive advantage as we go into quantum computing, 5G, 6G. In that world, we're, again, going to be at a great advantage. So, MAGA, Make America Great Again. We're going to do it economically, militarily. We've gotten our allies to ante up for 5% of their GNP towards defense. We have gotten other countries to invest, and companies to invest In the United States, something like $13 trillion of pledges that are starting. And this is from companies who would normally make their products overseas, but since they would be subject to a tariff if that product comes into the United States, they can build the plant in Michigan, make the product, have no tariffs. So all of these things added together put the United States in an extremely favorable competitive position. Now, how does that translate? So we've got MAGA, we've got America First, and then you've heard the expression drill, baby, drill. So environmentalists say, well, this is bad because, we have to worry about the environment, and certainly we do. But if you look at the needs of the world right now for energy, we don't have the infrastructure for renewables. We don't have enough solar panels, nuclear, wind, et cetera, et cetera. We just don't have the infrastructure built, and it's going to take years to build it, maybe 5 years, maybe 20 years. And that's to meet today's demands. Renewables can't even meet today's demands, and they're never going to be able to meet 2 years from now's demands without a massive investment that really is, we're talking not just a couple of trillion, but you're talking $20, $30 trillion, which nobody has that money for those investments. So the United States is, again, in this extremely favorable position because of our energy. But the other thing that we're in a favorable position for is our markets. So when I said earlier that we go to our allies and our trading partners and say, we expect you to, let's have fair trade here. Not, it's free trade. They call it free trade. But fair trade means that we all play by the same rules. Nobody wanted to do that. The Germans were very happy that they only had to pay a 5% tax for cars in the United States, and we had to pay a 25% tax on our cars going into Germany. But something really different has happened in the last couple of years. 10 years ago, the world assumed that they could make their products in whatever country it is and sell to Europe. Well, the European economies are flatlined. They're not buying a lot of stuff. China was another economy that everyone thought, well, 1 billion, 4 people, wow, we're going to sell all of our production in China. That hasn't happened, in part because of the Chinese aren't big consumers, and in part because the Chinese economy isn't growing like it was. They really haven't recovered from COVID. So who's the only big market there is left? That's the United States. And even though we didn't have terrific economic growth, we had, in fact, limping economic growth for 4 years. It's still better than anybody else's. So every country, everybody who makes things anywhere in the world needs to sell to the United States. We're the only market that's big enough that really counts. That gives us enormous economic and political leverage. So that's why we can go to other countries and say, you want to sell your stuff in America? This is the requirement you're going to have. We're going to have equal trading partners. We are going to have access to each other. You're going to invest in America. Because if not, we're just going to put a 150% tariff on you. And you'll go broke. And what does that mean? It really means that no country is going to be able to sell their stuff at 150% tariff into the United States and plan to make any money at all. Anyhow, so that's the genesis of Trump's foreign policy. What I'd like to do in the time left is maybe go onto one big example of what's happening, literally in the last hour and a half. And that's the developments in the Middle East. And then I'd like to have questions because, give me your toughest questions and I'll see if I can hold my own. What's happened is the whole Middle East peace deal. So was anybody watching about 2 weeks ago when Trump goes to the UN and, the escalator didn't work, he got stuck, and then he went into the UN General Assembly and the teleprompter didn't work, and people were focused on that. Said, oh, the UN's sabotaging Trump. The UN has said, well, we just didn't have the money to have this stuff work right. So that's where the focus was. Nobody was seeing what was happening in the hallways. Trump was meeting with all of the Gulf Arab leaders. These are the, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, et cetera. And he had given them a 20-point peace plan and said, I want you to sign on to this, and I'm going to get Bibi Netanyahu to sign on to it in 3 days. And that's how we're going to push a peace agreement in Gaza. I want to step back and say, how was he able to get these countries to do that? In his first term, he did something which was very controversial at the time. He went to the Arab leaders, the Saudis particularly, and wanted to form a new relationship. So we're in the White House Situation Room, and what happens with every new administration is you sit around the Situation Room and you kind of go country by country to say, okay, we didn't like the Obama policy, what's it going to be now? Or we didn't like Biden, we reassess and reevaluate our relationships with other countries. So in the first week, we're sitting around the Situation Room, which is not very big. I mean, it's like a big dining room table. And we're going country by country, and we got to Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, like a lot of Gulf Arab oil countries, we're undergoing a generational change of power. The older generation were guys in their 70s and 80s. There were sort of no guys in their 50s, but the next generation was in their 30s. So a big gap. And the president turned to me, and I said, well, we've always done business with the old guys. We know them. They've been pretty good economic partners of ours with the production of oil, but they're terrorist tolerant or terrorist adjacent, however you want to say it. They sort of turned a blind eye, and in some cases were funding terrorist movements. And then Jared Kushner, who was Trump's son-in-law, said, but I think, let's look at that younger generation. They're in their 30s. And I said, they're way too young. What do they know? They're untested. And then Jared pointed out, well, the majority of their population, 75% of they've had a big baby boom in the Middle East. 75% of their population is under the age of 35. So to the people of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, et cetera, these are not young guys. These are their contemporaries. And the value of these younger generation is they've been educated in the West, they're comfortable with women's rights, they're comfortable with open societies, and they've realized that they can no longer rely on high oil prices to fund their societies. They gotta figure something else out because they have this big youth population and they don't have the money to sustain that youth population as it's going forward. What do they need to do? So the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, called MBS, he said, we want to have a diverse environment, we want to diversify our economy, we want investment, we want to invest, we want people to invest in us, we want to do tech, we want to do sports. And so we say to them, well, okay, that sounds great, but how are you going to do this? And they realized that in order to have any investment in their country, they needed peace in the Middle East. They needed peace with Israel. And they particularly needed peace with Israel because Israel was a high-tech, you have Silicon Valley, well, it's called Silicon Wadi, and it's in Tel Aviv. And it's a very high concentration of, Israel's startup nation and tech. So the Arab countries looked and said, well, maybe we could use some of that in our countries. So they realized that any success they were going to have going forward was going to be predicated on peace with Israel. And that was the genesis of the Abraham Accords. It wasn't because everybody had a sudden light bulb moment of we should all have peace. It was because they needed the trade. And Trump encouraged that. Again, from the first week, he took a bet on the 30-year-old leaders. One of the first area that he visited as president the first time was the Middle East. And they did everything they said they were going to do. They abandoned the support of the terrorist movements around the world. They opened their societies. When Trump went back in his second term, his first foreign trip wasn't to England, wasn't to Canada, wasn't to Mexico, which is normally what a president does. It was to go to Saudi Arabia. And there was a conference in Saudi Arabia, and guess who presided over it? The person who opened the conference and really was like the MC of the conference. It was a woman. That never would have happened 5 years before. So having made this good relationship with a lot of the new generation of Arab leaders, that was how he then thought of flipping the script, which is what happened two weeks ago. Flipping the script meant that for decades, literally my whole professional career, and for 50 years, the thought was if you're ever going to have Middle East peace, you needed to have it between Israel and the Palestinians first. And if you didn't get there, you'd never have wider peace in the Middle East. And since Hamas, fault on both sides, but since it was never going to happen, round and round we went. And the peace never got going because it never got off of first base. The difference now is that with Trump said, okay, And what he's particularly fond of doing is if you say, well, we've always done it this way, then he just says, well, we're not going to do it this way again because it hasn't worked. So if you really want to get him to do something different, you say, well, this is the way we've always done it. And he said, well, we're not doing that again. So he flipped the script to say, our relationships in the Middle East are going to be predicated on the relationship with the Gulf Arab countries. And from there, we're going to build peace. So what happened 2 weeks ago was he was at the UN, and he got all of these Arab countries, everybody goes to the UN. It's like you go meet and greet. All the leaders were there, and he got them all to sign on to a 20-point plan, which said, immediate ceasefire, hostages are exchanged, Hamas lays down its arms, new government is, a technocratic government is formed under the auspices of the Gulf, of the countries in the Middle East. Peace will be kept by a peacekeeping mission from those same countries in the region, will be paid for by those same countries. And it had the effect of completely isolating Hamas. Because the countries in the Middle East said, okay, we all see what's happened with these Abraham Accords and the economic success that they've had. We think that we want to go forward with it. And everybody's sick of the war in the Middle East. Everybody's sick of the Gaza war. So Trump got these countries to sign up for it. So he got Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, all the countries which had been predisposed towards being against Israeli-Palestinian peace, had supported Hamas, had supported the Palestinians and Hamas. They abandoned them. That was 2 weeks ago. And then 2 days after that, Trump has Netanyahu to come to the White House, and then he announces that Netanyahu also has signed on to this 20-point peace plan, which was hard for Netanyahu because Israel would have to leave Gaza. Israel would not be able to establish new settlements on the West Bank or in Gaza. So Israel had to give up a lot, release a lot of Palestinian prisoners. And so he got Netanyahu to do it. And then Trump did something really interesting. He said, okay, we're now going to negotiate with Hamas. But if they don't negotiate quickly and in good faith, he turns to Bibi and he says, do whatever you have to do to finish the job. Go eliminate the rest of Hamas. And Bibi Netanyahu, who since in the last 2 years, since October 7th, had decapitated Hezbollah, had decapitated, but not completely, Hamas, had decapitated the Houthis, had taken out the Syrian air defense system. So all the Iranian proxies and allies, they're gone. And Iran itself, which had been supporting financially all of the terrorist movements and the governments that we didn't like, they were broke. They didn't have any money, they're not selling their oil, sanctions are being enforced. So all of a sudden, Hamas is isolated, nobody's supporting them financially, always follow the money, they were getting no money. But the genius of what he did was to say, to separate Hamas, not just from all the traditional Hamas supporters, but to separate Hamas from the Palestinian people. How do you do that? It's because all these Gulf Arabs have signed up to say, we will pay for rebuilding Gaza. Gaza is 98% rubble and 97% unemployed. You gotta rebuild it. But who pays for the rebuilding, and how do you rebuild it in a way that Hamas isn't in charge of the rebuilding, doesn't skim off the top, doesn't, I think, was terrorizing its own people. So that's why, I think an hour and a half ago, Trump was sitting in the White House and in a meeting, and Rubio handed him a note saying, we're very close to an agreement. Announce it now. So I don't know if he's actually announced it in the last hour or so, but Trump came out and said, I am going to go to the Middle East as early as Friday, and we think we have a Middle East peace agreement. Now, there are so many devils in the details, so maybe it doesn't work, but it's the only time and the first time any American president has gotten this close to a peace agreement. And the momentum of it, I think, is so significant that it may well result in something that's eluded people for not just decades, centuries, of how do you have peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians.